Hello, welcome to Biology Topic 7, Lesson 2, Adaptations. As in Lesson 1, you just need a pen, a piece of paper, but please turn your phones off, we don't want any distractions. The video is going to take about half an hour and there's going to be some tasks for you to complete along the way. Okay, we're going to start off by looking at the learning outcomes for today. Our challenge outcome for this lesson is to describe the ways that some plant and animal species are adapted for survival. And our aspire outcome is similar to the challenge outcome, but we're going to explain how these specific adaptations then help these plants and animals survive in the environments that they live in. Okay, we're going to start off by looking at some pictures of plants and animals. And we're going to consider the ecosystems that they survive in and all the ways they are adapted for survival. So I want you to think about the animals on the left of the line and the animals on the right of the line and try and consider which kind of ecosystems you think those animals would live in. Not too difficult. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to come up with the ecosystem that the animals on the left would live in and the ecosystem that the animals on the right would live in. Off you go. Okay, 10 seconds remaining. Brilliant. How did you get on? So the animals on the left obviously come from a desert environment. I think the biggest clue there is the camel, isn't it? And the animals on the right live in the Arctic region. So you've got the penguin, the walrus, the polar bear and the Arctic fox. On the left you've got the fenny fox with his big ears. You've got the desert lynx, you've got the lizard, and you've got the camel. Okay, if you got that, well done. Okay, we're going to look at each of those animal species in a little bit more detail. And we're going to start off with the desert animals. If you look at the red box on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide, I've just given you a summary of the conditions in the desert. And just a reminder that even though you probably realise it's hot and dry in the day, what students often forget is it's also very, very cold at night. It has a massive temperature range across a 24-hour period. Now, the biggest challenges that animals face of trying to survive in the desert is coping with very little water, but also controlling their body temperature and to stop it from going too high in the day and too low at night. Obviously, if either of those things happened, the animal would die. So I'm going to give you 3 adaptations, and I'm going to ask you to think about how the adaptation helps for a particular animal to survive. And we're going to start off with the fenny fox. The fenny fox is also commonly known as a desert fox, obviously because the desert is the environment it lives in. So just on a bit of paper, I want you to think about each of the adaptations I'm going to give you. Think about how that particular adaptation would help the fenny fox to survive in the desert environments. So the first adaptation I'm going to give you is thick fur. How would the fenny fox having thick fur help it to survive in the desert? The second adaptation, it has excellent hearing. And the third adaptation, you can see from the picture, it has these very large ears. The final thing I want you to think about for the fenny fox is I just want you to think for a second about anything you think that fenny fox would eat. So I'm going to give you 1 minute. I want you to explain how the thick fur, the excellent hearing and the large ears help the fenny fox to survive. And I just want you to jot down a few ideas as to what you think the fenny fox might eat. 1 minute, off you go. 10 seconds remaining. Get those ideas down. Okay, fantastic. Don't worry if you didn't get them all done. Okay, so thinking back to the fenny fox then, just remind ourselves of the conditions it's living in. It's very hot, very dry, there's a lack of water, but it's also very cold at night. So the thick fur would help the fenny fox to keep warm at night. Its excellent hearing would allow it to hear prey from long distances. And a bit of a clue to the last question, it can even hear prey that live underground. And its large ears allow heat to be lost through the ears. This is a mechanism of the fenny fox keeping cool during the day. So it's got the thick fur to keep it warm at night, but then it's got these large, ridiculous ears that allow it to lose heat during the day. And then thinking about the diet that the fenny fox exists on, it eats insects, small mammals and birds. And I mentioned earlier about it hearing prey underground. Some of those small mammals and desert rodents often live in burrows beneath the ground. So it can hear them beneath the sand surface because it has excellent hearing and it's more likely to find something to eat. Okay, moving on then to the desert lynx, also known as a caracal. Again, the same task I'm going to set you. I'm going to give you 3 adaptations of the desert lynx, and I'm going to ask you to think about how those 3 adaptations help the desert lynx to survive in the desert environment. So the first adaptation I'm going to ask you about is they produce very little but very concentrated urine. That just means wee. So they only produce a few drops of urine each day. They have very powerful back legs and they can actually jump up to 3 metres in height, and they are very, very good climbers. And the last adaptation I'm going to ask you to think about is these black tufts of hair that stick up quite high on the top of each one of their ears. So again, I'm going to give you about a minute to come up with some reasons why those 3 adaptations help the desert lynx to survive in the desert ecosystem. Off you go. Ten seconds remaining. Okay, brilliant. Did you manage to come up with something for each adaptation? Okay, so we're going to start off with a very little concentrated urine. This helps the desert lynx to survive because they can go for a very long period of time without water. By producing less urine, less waste liquid, they conserve more water, which means they actually need to consume less. And they can last over a week without getting a new drink of water. For powerful back legs then and the ability to jump high and climb, they can climb trees to catch prey. They are known to hide the prey they catch up trees. And they can also jump, and they can actually jump 3 metres high and catch birds. They are very, very good at catching birds. They're one of the only cat species that is known to exist on a diet primarily of birds. The long tufts of black hair at the top of their ears, these improve their hearing because they direct sound waves into the ear canal. And this allows them to hear prey that are a very long way away. Obviously, if they can hear prey a long way away, they're more likely to catch prey and less likely to die of starvation. So that is the desert lynx. Moving on to our third desert animal, something much smaller this time. We're going to look at the lizard. So I want you to think about the 3 adaptations and explain how the adaptation helps the lizard to survive in the desert environment. The first adaptation I'm going to give you is toes fringed with spiny scales, so really spiky scales on his toes. They are able to make burrows in the sand, and they actually spend hours hidden underneath the sand surface, and they have this sandy brown colour. So 1 minute again, how do those 3 adaptations help the lizard to survive in the desert environment? Off you go. Ten seconds remaining. Okay, brilliant. So the toes then, fringed with spiny scales that this lizard has, help it to survive because it enables it to move across the sand without sinking. The spiny scales also help it to walk on these really prickly, really hard rocks without hurting its feet. It's able to make burrows in the sand so it can escape the desert's heat. If it hides underneath the sand surface, it will be cooler. It also helps it to hide from predators or allows it to search for any small animals that might also exist in burrows beneath the sand. The sandy colour obviously for camouflage on the rocks and on the sand, making it more difficult for predators to see them and eat them for their lunch. Okay, the final desert animal we're going to look at is the camel. The camel has 3 adaptations which help it to survive in the desert environment. It's probably the first animal you think of when you think about the desert. And the first adaptation I'm going to ask you to consider is, why does Mr. Camel have huge feet? Then, why does he have long eyelashes? Why do camels have very thick, rubbery lips? And finally, why can they go a week or longer without water and drink up to 46 gallons in a single session? So 1 minute, think about those 4 adaptations and how they help the camel to survive. Ten seconds remaining. Okay, brilliant. What did you manage to come up with? Okay, so our camel has huge feet, quite obvious really, to stop it from sinking in the sand. Their feet would have a very large surface area, would allow it to move about on the sand more easily. Camels have very long eyelashes to prevent the sand from going into their eyes, kind of shield their eyes from any sandstorms that they might be in. They have very thick rubbery lips, which allow them to eat the prickly desert plants without feeling pain, so they'd quite happily be able to munch on a cactus without it damaging the lips or causing them too much pain. And the camels can go, this one's quite obvious, isn't it? They can go a week or longer without water. And when they do find water, they can consume huge amounts in a single sitting. This is just because the water is very scarce. So the more water they can drink in one go, the less regularly they need to find water to survive. Okay, so that is the end of our desert animals. The second ecosystem we're going to think about is the Arctic Circle. So we're thinking about an ecosystem where 80% of the land is covered in snow or ice for most of the year. It's quite dark for large periods of time, particularly during the winter months. Lots of the animals live in and out of the water. Some exist just on land, but they live in some of the harshest climates in the world. So it's very, very cold day and night. There's very little plant life. There's mass areas of snow and ice. The biggest challenges are obviously coping with those freezing temperatures, but also finding enough food to stay alive and avoiding becoming someone else's prey. So avoiding getting eaten by predators. So the first animal we're going to look at is the Arctic fox. And I want you to think back to a second about the image I showed you for the fenny fox, which had those really big ears. This image shows the Arctic fox, and the first adaptation I'm going to ask you to think about is the small body shape this Arctic fox has. So it's a lot more rounded and compact than the fenny fox or the desert fox was. It also has this white fur, but something really special about the Arctic fox is this fur can actually change to a brown colour at certain times of the year. And I want you to think about why that might help the Arctic fox to survive. And finally, thinking back to the fenny fox with his massive ears, why does the Arctic fox have very small pointy ears? So again, I'm going to give you 1 minute to come up with some reasons why, some explanations as to how those 3 adaptations would help the Arctic fox to survive in the Arctic environment. Off you go. Ten seconds remaining. Okay, brilliant. So the round, compact body shape, and I think the word compact would have given you a clue for this adaptation. So by having a rounded, compact body shape, there's a smaller amount of the fox on the surface. So the fox is said to have a smaller surface area. This helps him to keep warmer as a smaller percentage of his body is in contact with the cold surroundings and the cold air, so less heat would actually be lost. The white fur, which can change brown at certain times of the year, is obviously for camouflage. So the white colour gives it camouflage in snow and ice, but then for short periods of time during the year, there are times of the year when there isn't as much snow and ice and the ground would be a brown colour and there might even be some greenery with the plants. So then the brown fur also acts as camouflage when the weather is slightly warmer and some of the ice has actually disappeared. The small pointy ears on the Arctic fox, if you think about the fenny fox, had the massive ears which allowed it to lose more heat. The small pointy ears on the Arctic fox allow it to conserve a little bit of heat. They don't lose as much heat as bigger ears would, but they also allow it to hear prey moving around in underground tunnels. So even though they do have these small ears, they have still got very good hearing. The third Arctic Arctic animal we're going to think about. Again, like the camel, you think about when you asked to think about deserts, you tend to think about the polar bear when you're asked to think about Arctic regions. So the adaptations I'd like to think about for the polar bear are, again, rounded, compact body shape. And if you can remember what we just talked about for the Arctic fox, that will help you. The second adaptation, it's got big furry feet in a similar way to the camel, but living in a very different ecosystem. And the polar bear has very thick layers of blubber. So I'm going to give you 1 minute again. How do those three adaptations help the polar bear to survive in the Arctic environment? 10 seconds remaining. Okay, fantastic. What did you come up with? So a rounded, compact body shape, again a smaller surface area, so less of the polar bear would be exposed to the very freezing temperatures in the surroundings it lives in. This is a mechanism which helps it to keep warmer, as a smaller percentage of the body is in contact with the cold air. The big furry feet, similar to the camel walking on the sand, act like snowshoes. And they give it a bigger surface area in contact with the snow so it can walk across the snow without sinking in and walk very quickly and hunt its prey. The thick layers of blubber act as insulation to keep the bear warm in these freezing temperatures. Okay, 2 to go. Our third Arctic animal I want you to think about the way it's adapted is Mr. Penguin. So the penguin then is, again, a pretty iconic animal when you think about Arctic regions. And the first adaptation of a penguin I want you to think about is, why is it black on its back but white on its chest? The second one has a streamlined body and strong front flippers. How do you think those adaptations will help the penguin to survive? And finally, it has very strong claws. Okay, so 1 minute, off you go. Ten seconds remaining. Okay, brilliant. So the first one then, I find this really interesting. Penguins have evolved to be a very dark black colour on their back. So when they are swimming in the water, bearing in mind it's quite dark, if you were looking down onto the surface of the water, it would be black. The penguin would swim on its front, so you wouldn't be able to see the penguin in the water. So any polar bears that are on the ice around the where the penguins are swimming wouldn't be able to see them because they are black, swimming on the very dark waters. But they are white on their chest, so when you are underneath the penguin in the water, you look up and it's light, because obviously the sun is shining above the ocean, and the penguin is white. So again, it is camouflaged in the bright white water as you look up from the bottom of the ocean. So both those colours of the penguin are designed to camouflage it, either looking down on it when it's swimming on the water, or looking up at it when it's above you if you're a species such as a seal swimming underneath the water, wanting to eat it from beneath. It also means the white colour does give it a little bit of camouflage on the ice, but the main reasons are the camouflage it gives the penguin when it's swimming. The streamlined body and strong front flippers, obviously a penguin's biggest concern is catching fish to eat and not starving to death, so it enables the penguin to move through the water quickly. The flippers act as paddles, propelling the penguin through the water at speed. They are very, very fast, good, strong swimmers. The strong claws then help the penguin to move about on the ice. They always look a little bit awkward, don't they, when they're waddling around on the ice, but they can actually move quite efficiently on the ice, and they do travel long distances inland during the coldest periods of time during the year, because it's a little bit warmer. And if ever you've seen the DVDs about the penguins, you'll actually see it. They can walk up to over 100 miles during the coldest parts of the year. Okay, so our final Arctic animal, and the picture always makes me smile of these, Mr. Walrus, massive animal that lives in the Arctic Circle. Always looks very, very awkward when he moves about on land, but survive very, very well in these ecosystems. They exist in huge herds. Hundreds of them live together. So the three adaptations I'm going to ask you about for the walrus are these massive canine tusks, the thick layer of fat beneath the skin, and finally the rear and front flippers. So it's got these two front legs, and it's got this kind of triangular shaped rear flipper. How do those three adaptations help the walrus to survive in the Arctic environment? And just remind yourselves of the conditions and the challenges that the walrus do survive in. I'm going to give you 1 minute, off you go. Ten seconds remaining. Okay, brilliant. So these massive canine tusks, they act as weapons to defend themselves from predators, but they also act as tools to help it to kill any prey it catches. The thick layer of fat beneath the skin, we used the word blubber, didn't we, with the previous species? Again, insulates the walrus in the freezing temperatures and prevents its inner body temperature from dropping too low by acting as a layer of insulation. And the rear and front flippers, again, to say the colossal size of these creatures, they are very, very good swimmers. The paddles at the front, their front legs, help the walrus to swim very well. The rear flipper also allows it to waddle around and to move with some stability on land. They can move quite quickly on land, and they are very good swimmers when you consider the size of them. Okay, so you've gone through the 8 species and their specific adaptations. We've looked at ways they are adapted for survival in either the desert or the Arctic environments, and you've given me some explanations as to how those specific adaptations help them to survive in the environments they live in. Okay, so we've had a look at some species which exist in the desert environment and how they are adapted to survive in that environment. And we've also had a look at some animal species which exist in the Arctic regions and how they survive in these environments. So we're just going to finish off this lesson by looking at the dodo. The dodo is a large bird that unfortunately has been extinct for quite a long time. If a species cannot adapt to its surroundings, it will eventually become extinct. It might not happen straight away, it certainly wouldn't happen overnight, but over generations, if species numbers continue to decline because birds cannot adapt to their environment or any other animals cannot adapt to their environment, they will eventually become extinct. So we're just going to finish off by watching this short video about some of the reasons why scientists think the dodo became extinct.
If there's one thing most people know about the dodo bird, it's that they were dumb. If they had been human, they would have been the kind of person who'd change his pants while driving. Yes, legend has it, this creature was only really ever a danger to itself, a true poster child for the Darwin Awards. At least, that's the story we've been fed. But is it true? Turns out the whole story that the dumb dodo got itself hunted to extinction by being so stupid may have been a big load of doo-doo. Leon Classen, professor of vertebrate paleontology and evolution at Netherlands Maastricht University, believes the Dutch sailors who first encountered the bird in 1598 didn't actually hunt the birds to extinction, though the sailors likely had an indirect role in the demise of the species. Previously, it was believed that birds were fat and were hunted for food. But in the dense jungles of their native Mauritius, the bird would have been much leaner than previously thought, and therefore not as appetizing of a meal. Further, these jungles would have also made it much harder for the few hundred sailors to catch the birds, regardless of how unafraid the dodos were of human beings. Claessens believes the real problem was the rats and other animals that would have landed with the sailors. These animals would have been able to multiply quickly in an unrestricted habitat and would have feasted on dodo eggs and outcompeted them for food, a double extinction whammy. And then the triple whammy hit, rapid habitat loss. The island of Mauritius was not initially considered very valuable, just a place for ships to stop over. Some even thought the island was cursed due to a large amount of shipwrecks in the area. That all changed when the Dutch realized they could export the island's ebony wood for sale, which became the island's primary economic activity. Not long after, settlers were turning the once wild island into a big agricultural plantation, leading to heavy deforestation and loss of native plant species. The forest that provided natural protection for the dodo bird gave way to sugarcane fields, making the birds oversized sitting ducks for any predator who came along, as the dodos literally had no fight or flight reflex. Lack of flight also made dodos ill-suited to surviving natural disasters. Evidence has been found that even before human settlement, many of the birds died in flash floods brought on by cyclones. Once they lost the natural protection of their sheltered forests, they became even more vulnerable. The entry for dodo in the Oxford English Dictionary describes something that is no longer effective, valid, or interesting. And the origin of the word comes from the Portuguese dodo, translating to simpleton. It's a sad legacy for what was once a beautiful, totally innocent creature. Beyond their reputation for stupidity, dodos are a symbol of how quickly and profoundly humans can impact an environment and drive a species to extinction. Until we can clone them, dodos are gone forever, and the best thing we can do about it is to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors. It only took 100 years to wipe out the dodo, and while exact dates of extinction vary, most believe the dodo was gone by the 1660s, with other reports claiming they lasted on nearby islands until the 1690s. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter much, because either way, the bird and just about every trace of it is gone forever. All we've got are a few records and sketches from sailors, and one or two shoddily stuffed birds in museums. We're hardly even sure what color they were. Most paintings from the time show dodos with white feathers, but first-hand accounts describe them with gray to black plumage. Heck, we didn't even know they had kneecaps until 2014, after a 3D scan of the last remaining skeleton revealed them. So, have we learned our lesson? Not yet, it seems. In another 100 years, it's estimated that 25% of all bird species will be extinct in the wild unless we take big steps to clean up our act. If not, we'll be the real dodos.
Okay, so as the video said, the original theory was that the Dutch sailors hunted the dodos to absolute extinction. They did hunt the dodos extensively and they would have led to their numbers decreasing, but they possibly didn't hunt them entirely down to extinction. The jungles were very dense, would have meant it was very difficult to catch the dodo. And other theories include the theory that small animals such as rats, which were fetched to the island by the sailors on the boats, would have eaten the dodo's eggs. They would have also outcompeted the dodo for food sources, meaning the dodos couldn't successfully reproduce and they couldn't find food. Another issue which the dodos would have been faced with was deforestation. Suddenly they realised that the ebony wood that lots of the trees on the island consisted of was very, very valuable. And suddenly lots of these trees started to get chopped down, and deforestation meant that the habitats for the dodos were destroyed very rapidly. This would definitely have made it much more difficult for them to survive. Other theories talk about the fact that the dodos couldn't fly and how difficult it would have been for them to survive during cyclones and other natural disasters. All of these factors would have resulted in a decline in the numbers of dodos, and eventually a contribution of these factors would have led to them becoming completely extinct. Okay, so we have successfully met our learning outcomes for this lesson. We've looked at the ways in which plant and animal species are adapted for survival. We've explained how some specific adaptations help them to survive in very specific environments. Your final task is to complete the Google quiz, which takes the shape of the Google form as the plenary to this lesson. You can use any notes you made on the adaptations of the animals as you went along, which will help you with the Google quiz. You'll receive a mark immediately when you submit the form. There's also a Google document as an extension to this lesson, which features exam questions, not just about adaptations of animal species, but also about abiotic and biotic factors from lesson 1. Stay safe, keep working hard, and the next lesson will be available soon.